There we go. So great. Welcome everybody to this talk with Joe Avery. Much anticipated. And by the look of it, from the number of we've got live, it's well attended. So thank you very much to Joe. Joe and I have known each other since she got a Moxie first and then upgrade to the Moxie XL, which is what you've now got. And it's been lovely to see your progress and the way that you've embraced the long arming as part of your quilting repertoire. So, but your quilting goes way back, and that's really what your talk's going to be the focus of, is some of the history and some of your the quilting and the experiences that you've had. So, with no further ado, and with no more introduction, I'm going to pass over to you. Just one other thing is, if you've got any questions, pop them into the chat, and we'll take them at the end. And you'll be able to see Joe's slideshow shortly. There we go. And we're looking forward to answering any of those questions that you might have at the end of Joe's talk. I'm going to mute you all just so you don't pop up on the screen. Okay, and we'll see you at the end of Joe's talk. Thanks very much.
So thank you, Liz. Yes, I'm Joe Avery, and I'm up here near Edinburgh. Obviously not from there originally, I'm from London. This is a talk about my quilting journey, but specifically about quilting rather than just quilts. So it's really focused on the quilting technique side of it and how I've progressed with that over the years. And it's one that we did at Festival Quilts, which is why it still says live there. And obviously, I am live, but what we did at Festival Quilts was it was like half talk and half a live demo, which obviously we're not going to be doing here, but I'm going to do the same thing, but with drawings at the end. And I've made the presentation part longer, mainly because I'll just talk more, but also I've added some extra slides in. So let's just get started. Here we go. So this is me 30 years apart. So on the left is me in 1994, and then this is last year at QuiltCon last year at 2024 on the right with a quilt I had in the show. So this is just a really nice way of illustrating how long I've been quilting and how long I've had quilts in exhibitions. So I started quilting back in the 1990s, and I really wanted to be like an art quilter and have quilts in exhibitions and put them in, museums and things, and be like Pauline Burbage, really, who was who lived quite close to me in the borders. But there was just no real pathway to earning any money at being a quilt then. Pauline was like one of the most famous quilters in the country, and I knew she still struggled really to make a living at it. So at that point, I was living up in Scotland, and I'd been quilting for a number of years. And I had small children, and I needed to be involved in my husband's business and earn some money. So I kind of, as I say, there was no real way to progress it in any way that was going to contribute to our finances. So I just put it all aside, the quilting, and I just made what I call utilitarian quilts, which were basically quilts for 21st birthdays of my nieces and nephews and things like that. And then what happened was I was, quilting away, making these really boring quilts till about 2007, 2008. And my kids were older by then. And so I was getting a little bit more back into quilting again, quilting for employees now. We had quite a big business, lots of employees, and I was making wedding quilts for them. And then I discovered online quilting blogs. And I suddenly realized that I felt quite isolated as a quilter at this point. I tried going to various quilting groups, but I was really doing what I would call modern quilting now, but I didn't know that's what it was. And they were all still doing quite traditional quilting. So I didn't feel like they were interested in what I was doing and vice versa. But then I discovered there was this whole online community of quilters, and I immediately started my blog, which was called My Bear Paw, and that inadvertently became the start of a whole new career and a way of making quilting my career. But at this point, I was just having fun. Um, Quilting and being inspired by all these other bloggers out there. And one of the things that they were doing was free motion quilting. And I thought, I'm going to have a go at the free motion quilting. So I asked around on the blogs, looked at some tutorials, and it was like, I had to get a special foot. So I bought this foot for my very, very basic brother that I bought from Costco. And when I got the foot, I looked in my accessories and I saw I already had one there. And I'd completely forgotten that back in what I call my first age of quilting, when I was making those art quilts, I had been doing free motion quilting. For some reason, I'd just completely forgotten it. I'd been doing quite a lot of free motion quilting and free motion embroidery. I used to do a lot of gold embroidery on velvet, like, talk about trying to pick two difficult things to do, and made sort of waistcoats and hats and this sort of thing. So I was like, I can't believe I've forgotten I did this. So and I immediately took to it again. Now, there may have been some sort of muscle memory from doing it previously, but in those days, but this is sort of 2009, 2010, everyone was just after a very tight, stipply texture. So it was all about stipple or meander and then washing your quilts and putting them in the tumble dryer and getting a crinkle. And no one was really into sort of doing anything too, I mean, perhaps they were in other parts of the quilt world, but in this kind of small online quilt world, we were just all trying to get a lovely crinkly texture. So this is what I started to do. Now, at this point, even though I had been quilting since the 1990s, my quilting still had a long way to go. My patchwork still had a long way to go, and my quilting. And one of the things I just wanted to say here was a bit of a philosophy that I have about trying to keep the two things in tandem. I think what happens a lot these days is people master patchworking and they don't master quilting at the same time. And when you start making a quilt, your first quilt's going to be quite rubbish. You won't have the accuracy. You won't, it's going to be a bit of a mess, probably, for most people. And so's your quilting. But it doesn't matter because you've got to get better at them both together. So if you get better at just the patchwork and you don't do any of the quilting, then you start to make these absolute masterpieces and you don't want to risk quilting them. So then you end up sending them off to the wonderful long armers, which of course we want to support. But otherwise, you just end up with a big pile of them. I mean, that's a good time to get a long arm, of course. But I do think that it's a really good idea to think about this right at the start of your patchwork and quilting. And it's something I always encourage my students when I started to teach this. And it's a big part of the book that I wrote about patchwork and quilting. So um, I'd started with this very simple meander and this very basic brother machine, and then I decided to branch out and get a better machine. And I bought a Pfaff Quilt Expression. My son has this machine, it's still going. So this is about 2012 now, maybe. And at this point, I'd got so into the whole patchwork and quilting and all these other crafts I was doing from being so inspired online that I'd opened up a craft studio and started teaching in Edinburgh. And I was teaching patchwork and quilting and embroidery and crochet and all sorts of things. And this is one of the first quilts I was using up with a faff for. And what I was trying to do here was just loops that like trailing leaves. So it's very easy to do a loop. What I discovered is a much better starter overall FMQ pattern than stippling or meandering. I do find that I think lots of loops, which I'll show you when we get onto that bit, are much easier to master. So this is just a trailing line with some loops either side that looks a little bit like leaves. And this was a quilt that I made for Popular Patchwork. So at this point, I was starting to design things for magazines. It worked really well to get a quilt into or any sort of project into a magazine that I wanted to also teach as a class. So I would make the quilt for the magazine, write the pattern, send off the quilt, they would photograph it and send it back. And then I could then sell it as a class in my studio. And I would otherwise have to have made that quilt specially just for the class sample. So I got kind of a dual way of working, and it meant that it was financially enough, in that magazines don't pay a lot on their own, so this was a good way of doing it, and I did that for years. So this was called tumbling logs, because I had this brilliant idea of a tumbler surrounded by log cabins, and I thought, oh, great title, tumbling logs. So it was all the K facet fabrics that I was saying to Liz last time I did this that I got from the cotton patch, and she reckons she was probably packing these up to send to me at that point. So and this was for Popular Patchwork magazine, which at that point was about the best of a small group of very traditional quilting magazines, and there really wasn't a lot more going on at that point. But then a whole explosion of quilts started to quilting magazines and craft magazines started with sort of Molly Makes and like tons of different ones, and Love Patchwork Quilting and Quilt Now, and they were very modern magazines. So they I was doing a lot of stuff for them, and this one was a quilt, the back of a quilt for Quilt Now. So I can just had this one next, really. It's not chronological, but it shows you how you can go from very simple loop leaves to other trailing leaves. So in this, I just started drawing more complicated leaves. So there's an oak leaf, there's a very basic leaf, there's some holly and a sort of mapley leaf. So I just mixed up those four leaves and just trailed them around with this kind of trailing line between them. So you can do the leaf, go all the way around the leaf, and then go up the vein in the middle, and off you go again. So this was the front of that quilt. It's called Lone Star Rising, and it's a kind of modern take on a Lone Star, whipping, it's scaling it up so it kind of outgrows the grid of the quilt, and therefore you can lop off a couple of the arms of the star, which means it's a bit quicker to do because it's quite a laborious quilt. This was a quilt I did for a very early issue of Love Patchwork Quilting. I think it was number 9. And around this time, I'd taken a little bit of free motion quilting education from Trudy Wood, who I'm sure a lot of you know. This was at the Fat Quarterly retreat, which I think was probably 2013 in London. So the Fat Quarterly was a digital magazine that was run by all the kind of online bloggers at that time, and they started to have a retreat in 2012, and it was kind of all the kind of online blogging people we got to meet in real life for the first time. And it's the first time I met Lynn Goldsworthy, who's one of my partners in the Thread House now, and she was organizing, one of the organizers for this. And a couple of years later, Karen Lewis also made it to teach at the retreat, and I met her as well. So that was when we were first all met at the same time. And now we run a little business together. So Trudy was just doing what they call a tabletop class, where she was just with pencil and paper was showing us how to work various free motion quilting patterns. One of them being feathers, and another one being mussels, which I really liked, and how to do spirals and things. So this was a great way of me kind of pushing myself on, giving me some other ideas and a bit of confidence to try things. So as this was a feather pieced quilt, I thought I'd have a go at the feathers. I quite enjoyed them. Did these really, really long ones just on my, domestic on the faff, and sort of went backwards and forwards with these. I mean, it's my own way of doing them. Nobody else would probably have attempted that way. I hadn't bought an Angela Waters book or anything like that at this point, so I was very much just kind of, making things up as I went along, which actually has done me very well in life. So you often find out different ways of doing it, or your own ways of doing it, by just going for it. And so here's some spirals. So yeah, that was another thing Trudy was talking about, spirals. So the quilt on the left was a bee quilt that I founded the Edinburgh Modern Quilt Guild in 2014, following a modern Scottish quilt exhibition I organised the year before. And there was a lot of interest. So we managed to get enough people to start the Edinburgh Modern Quilt Guild. We've just had our 10-year anniversary last year. And we started to do bees in groups of bees within the guild. And I think I probably started it off. So this was our first, the Granny Square quilt there on the left was one of the first ones, and it was a gift for someone. And what I was doing with there was spirals with petals around. So I'd already done a bit with spirals, and then, I get very easily bored. So I don't want to do the same spiral. One, I want to put some variations in there. So this is spirals with petals around to make them look like giant flowers, and then just trailing on to the next one, because I didn't really know much about how to move between motifs at this point. And then I went to QuiltCon in 2015, so 10 years ago now, and I did an Angela Waters class on a long arm. First time I'd ever used one of those, lots of fun. And she showed us how to do these interlocking spirals. Which made so much sense. So I started to use that way of moving around, and then also to put things like little pebbles in the bars of the spirals. And I'm still using my faff here, as you can see. One of my very good friends, Tatiana, who's an amazing long arm quilter and who loved Angela Waters, bought me one of her books. And this was really interesting because it was showing you how to take, I think it was like Shape by Shape, or one of these great books she's done. They're all really good. How to take shapes from your piece top and then fill those with the free motion quilting. So her feather there is just filling this shape that I've created with this pattern, which is called Conkers. This is one of the first quilts we did for the Thread House. So Lynn, Karen, and I had got together in 2016, and we decided we would organise our own retreats because the fat quarterly ones, after 3 years, had finished, sort of disbanded, and we would start to design our own patterns. So we started off with 3 patterns each. And then we never did any others because we didn't have anyone else making us do them. So unless, doing your own deadlines is quite difficult. So we just forgot about that. We just ended up doing the retreats for a long time. And now we do sort of an online academy, which I'll be more about as I go along. So this was one of the first quilts I did for the Thread House, which is we still have those patterns available. So it's a kind of modern take on a pickle dish. It's creating a kind of pickle dish look, but just by using a New York beauty quarter and some half square triangles. And you don't have to do that quite difficult piecing of the sort of lemon shape in the middle of pickle dishes and double wedding rings. Instead, you can build it up like a sort of New York in quarters like that. So I used those shapes that I've created and quilted motifs inside them. So you can see the kind of big pink squares have got like petals in them. And then I was using the sort of flame shapes and filling those with pebbles. It was very fancy for me, this, and it did actually get exhibited in quite a few places. It went to California and it went one of those Mancuso World quilting tours. So it was a very traveled quilt, and I have sold it to someone that I like. So it's always good to sell it to someone that you know and you can ask back if you really need it. Um, there's another picture of it. Put two in for that. Such a nice quilt. Um, so this was another one that I did for the Thread House. It's called Starlights. And with this, I was going back to one of my favorite things, which is like a kind of mussels flames. I don't use them so much now, but I love the way you could move so easily around the whole quilt. So when you're doing quilts for magazines, you only have a certain amount of time to get them finished. If you could do something really fancy on, but you're not going to get paid anymore. So what you want is a nice overall pattern that you enjoy doing, you find quite easy to do. And anything with sort of mussels or flames idea, I really liked. And I would just find all these different ways of mixing it up so that it's a bit different each side. With this one, I kind of gave the mussels a bit of a kickback. So that just gave it a little bit more of a wavy texture to it. And you can start in the middle and you can work your way out with free motion quilting with this. I would work outwards on my domestic machine until I ran out of bobbin, and then I would go back to the middle and work out again, and then somehow it would all get done. It would all get filled. That's that looking there. So you can see the whole quilt, not just the close-ups. And this was the third of the quilts I did for the Thread House. And with this, I was using this big blousy flower I like to do, which is really a flower with lots of echoing. So right at the start, we were talking about the loops and how you could make loops into leaves, but you can also make loops very easily into flowers. So one of the other really early quilted FMQ patterns I did was flowers, just endlessly trailing flowers, really simple one with loops. Then you put a circle in, and then maybe you develop it into something like this. Perhaps it's got a spiral in the middle, like the other one I showed you. So with this one, you're doing circles and then going in and doing a circle within a circle. And then you work your petals around the edge, but you leave a space between them so you can echo into them. And then I would just do a little trailing line to move to the next one and fill up the whole thing. I was still doing this is about 2017, 18 at this point, and I was still doing quilts for Love Patchwork and Quilting, but doing a lot more for today's quilter now. But they'd asked me to do a kind of modern update on a double wedding ring. I love that whole pickle dish double wedding ring. It's a bit of an obsessive pattern of mine. I've done many, many versions over the years. So this was me mixing up double wedding ring and pickle dish. It's called double dish fish with another bit of a off-grid element and some extra bits in the corners, and it created these weird sort of like fish shaped organisms. So I made those the quilting motif, and I just created sort of drew those all over the quilt, again just trailing between them. There you go, you can see now. I think at this point I've possibly gone on to my, yes, I think so. So I upgraded to a Janome Horizon memory craft about 7 years ago, I think. So that's what the foot that's on there. And you can see how I was doing these And I didn't use a ruler or anything for those lines. I was, able to just do relatively straight lines, as straight as you can get on a free motion quilting. And that's the whole, most of the quilt there, very modern one. And so this is about 2018. Yeah, I'm on with Janome now. Very happy with it for free motion quilting, I have to say. Not so happy with straight line, but we'll come to that. But I'm working on my book, New Patchwork and Quilting Basics here with C&T publications, publishing. And they had said at the start, is there any of our other books you'd like as sort of research? And they do Angela Waters, and they also publish Christina Camelli, and I really liked her style as well. So I got one of her books. And the one thing that I really took from hers that was very different was a way of moving between shapes called kissing. Now, I don't know whether she came up with this or it's something that lots of people do. I hadn't heard of it before, but if you look at the way these stars are attached, they're attached at their points. And that was something I got from her. I put a little circle in between them. So you have to sort of be able to travel back along the same line a bit to get to the right point. And it's a bit like a game of chess. You've got to sort of think a couple of moves ahead to make sure you don't go off, especially doing a star shape, which is a bit weird. But I really like this look and the way they kind of kiss next to each other and trail around without any trailing lines. That was a quilt for today's quilter. This was a quilt I did for the Quilter's Planner, which I think is still going, but the Quilter's Planner all used to do like a magazine that went with it, with like one quilt pattern for every month. And I can't remember, so I was involved with that. And this is my way of trying to design a quilt that looks like it's improv, which is kind of my favorite way of working, but is not improv at all. So these wonky curves are created with 6 different quarter block templates. So you've got 6 different quarters, templates to make those, and then you mix and match them up, and you get something that looks like it's really wonky and improv, but you have not had to do any of that. You've been able to use lots of pins and make sure that you've pieced it exactly. So it's a kind of like a way of mixing the two styles. I would probably have prefer to create this without any pins, very, very wonky improvs, but I know lots of people really don't like it. So it was a way of giving them something. And it's pretty modern looking. And one of the things I've wanted to do for a while was really just straight line quilting on my modern quilts, because I think things like matchstick quilting or very tight grids can give, a really modern look to quilts in a way that quite curly Q free motion quilting does not. And I'd been frustrated with my domestic quilting, my even the Janome where I'd got a big walking foot on it. The faff didn't really have a big enough walking foot. I thought, oh, I'll get this Janome big walking foot, had a special thing for extra pressure. And I still found when I tried to do straight line quilting, it always pulled and I was never happy with it. It was never as flat as I'd like it to be. So this was my way of trying to get very thin, almost matchstick lines together, but free motion quilting. So it's what I now call square interlocking rainbows. And I've come back to do this a lot, but this is the first time I tried this. So you're just doing a sort of square box around 3 sides and then back again, then you move on to the next one. And it has given it exactly what I wanted, which was like lots of very close together straight lines. So it's free motion quilting, but it hasn't got all the curliness. So then I took that on with this quilt. This is 2019 now, and this is the Dandelion Clock quilt. And so this is part of a technique I call freehand foundation piecing. And that first quilt I showed you that was back in 1994, I used exactly the same technique then. Back in the 90s, we didn't have home printers. You couldn't just print foundation paper piecing patterns and then just sew over them. That hadn't even been thought of yet. So instead, if you wanted to do foundation piecing, you had to do it on a foundation fabric, like a traditional would have been traditionally done with things like log cabins, where they would have done a stamp onto it or something, or it would have come printed, and you would have then used that as a pattern to do flipping foundation piecing. So the way I was sort of shown to do it in my quilting group was to use interfacing, sew-in interfacing, or what we called viline, and draw up your patterns on that, and then use that for foundation piecing. And it gives you uh, it gives you this freedom that you can draw up much bigger things than you could on an A4 sheet of paper and then print it out. And I mean, I know you can stick them together, but I really like the fact that you can work on a much bigger canvas for this. But you can also draw up something very freehand and then just piece onto that. And I really like, you don't have to remove the paper afterwards. the interfacing is very light. You don't really notice it's there. So actually, the block sort of in the middle, I had created for an online tutorial for another block of the month that someone was doing, and I'd really liked it. And I thought I already had a tutorial on my blog for this technique. It's still there. This is a slightly different one. Um, and I just thought this works really well. I'm going to try and do this and make it very off-grid and very modern, lots of negative space. Now, negative space is super scary if you're not very confident in free motion quilting. So you can see I was getting a bit more confident here because I was willing to tackle all that negative space. And I tackled it by first of all, let me see, I think we've got a close up. So first of all, I did quite fancy quilting within the bars of the wonky curves. So you can see the sort of little triangular bits there. And we've got this like almost sea anemone things. I think I'd got a lot of ideas from going to QuiltCon that year and seeing how other people quilted. I find often it's the quilting that really gives me so much inspiration when I go to shows more than the actual piecing of the quilts. So I've got all these different ideas and I was trying them out. That was working really well, sort of outlined the wedges and filled them in. And then I went everywhere with that square interlocking rainbow, which you can see much better here. But then large areas of it, I'm just going to go back to show you. Whoops. Hang on. I created sort of ghost versions of those dandelion clocks, a bit like I'd done with that double dish fish. You know, just take the motif from your piecing and then just draw that up. So you can see there are a few of those there where I'd done sort of like I say, kind of ghost or invisible versions of it. And then in between that, lots of these square interlocking rabbits and also some square spirals, which I always try and call squirrels, but it does not trip off the tongue, so it's not really working out there. So let's just call them square spirals, which isn't easy to say. They're mixed in amongst those interlocking square rainbows. And again, this is something I've come back to recently and really exploring. But I did it first with this quilt, and this quilt won a first prize at the Scottish Modern in the modern category at the Scottish Quilting Show in 2020, and it got a judge's choice at Festival Quilt. So it was I was like, I'm onto something here. This is doing well. So this again is showing you what I was doing a lot of at this point. Still on my domestic machine. This was during lockdown. We had done this pattern for one of our virtual retreats we were doing we couldn't do any of our in-person retreats at the Thread House. So we started to do lots of virtual retreats on Facebook. And this it's that same New York Beauty Quarter that was in the Conkers. So I really like recycling my ideas. Let's just see what else we can do with that. And I created this little foundation paper piece butterfly that's on point and quite nice, and you can make it look quite off grid and give yourself lots of negative space. So I was doing lots of sort of interesting, intricate filling of the butterflies. And then in the background, I did something which I call my coffee bean pattern. So I really like the look of pebbles, but they're quite hard to do and very laborious because you have to do a lot of traveling back around the outside of the pebbles, and that's quite difficult to hit it exactly. So my idea is to go around the circle. These are a bit maybe scaled up a bit than they're big pebbles, shall we say, and then go through the center of them to travel to the next bit and not have to go around the outside. And then you can, if you want to go back the other way, you can go through your center twice and do a bar of through the middle, so you can see them a bit quite well on the left hand side there. And actually it's quite a nice modern look to pebbles, I think, and much easier to do. And there we go. I'm doing them here on my Moxie. So the Moxie arrived. So why did I get a Moxie? In fact, there's a lot of chat about that and why to get one in a minute. But I was still very frustrated with the fact that I couldn't do matchstick quilting and I wanted this look. And as I'm never going to manage this, I didn't get my free motion, I didn't get a long arm because I wanted to do fancy free motion quilting. I wanted to do very boring straight lines, right? So I didn't really have room for one of these before, but then what happened in 2019, late 2019, my husband at this point was making tiny houses. These are kind of like posh caravans. It was a big there was loads of them around. They don't really work that well in this country. They work in places like America where they've got massive roads and things. Anyway, he was making these for people, and he had a gap in his schedule. Somebody had cancelled, and I said, "Why don't you make me a studio, a school, little tiny house, schoolhouse, and I'm going to sell my shop I had then, which where I taught all my classes, and I'm going to have my classes in this schoolhouse studio, right?" So that's what he did. And I told everybody I was doing this early 2020. Oh, later in the year, you'll be able to come and have classes with me in my studio. Don't worry, I know I'm closing the shop and everyone's sad. And I found somebody to buy the shop. It was all going to go through on the 1st of April, I think. And then, of course, everything shut down. Couldn't transfer the shop over. Had to, do a lot of mail order because everybody wanted everything. I went to, sold a lot of fabric. Anyway, so started to do online teaching in that schoolhouse studio. Thought, oh, I'm quite enjoying this. Bit easier with not real people here and just a camera. This could be easier. And so set the whole room up in this sort of early time for online classes, not real classes. And then in the July when we opened up again, actually managed to sell the shop. The lady still wanted to buy it. We thought it was all over. Sold the shop, and then had to decide, am I going to start to sort this whole schoolhouse out to have real students or carry on doing online things? And I thought, if I just carry on doing online teaching in here, I can move all my sewing room in here as well. And then I've got an empty room in the house. I could have a long arm. So that basically sold it. I've never had an actual real life student anywhere near my schoolhouse. Sorry, everybody, but it just got too easy to do online teaching and I could have a long arm. So I got in touch with Liz and Pete and I was asking them about various options. And they went, do you know, we've just found out about this new Moxie machine. This could be perfect because, what I was explaining to them was I don't want to go into business as a long arm. I don't want to do anybody else's quilts. I just want to do my quilts. And I had quite a lot. I'd been busy during lockdown making lots of quilt tops. So I think we talked about me being a Moxie mentor, the ambassador, and I think I got the first Moxie in the country. So, and luckily I've got a very practical husband who was able to set it up for me using the amazing instructions on the app, which is fantastic, that build app. And off I went doing my little coffee beans. So I did this little slide for the show that we were doing, where we were kind of sending people straight over to try out their long arm for themselves. So why quilt with a long arm? So these are my main points. No more basting, and this is often the only you can stop here with a lot of people. That's it. I'm in. Anyway, there isn't basting, but it's still. I always say it takes a while to pin it on, right? But you're standing up. You're not crawling around on the floor. The area that you would have used, I used for basting now had a machine in it. So I couldn't do basting there anymore. So that is really nice. Okay. And then your quilting standing up, as well as your basting standing up, your quilting standing up, with all the machines, all the quilts I did for magazines, I'd, 7 hours, 6 or 7 hours per quilt, say, in hour and a half chunks, loads and loads of sitting down. So much better for your shoulders and everything. Next one, better for your shoulders, standing up, not over your machine. I've been very careful with free motion quilting about getting my machine very low down and me high up so I didn't hurt my shoulders. However, they still take some toll in this position all the time. Very different from being really upright. Better for your hands, something I had not thought about at all. Your hands take a lot of pressure with free motion quilting. I've always suffered with a lot of RSI issues from the ridiculous amounts of crafting I do. But I actually think that the free motion quilting was one of the worst things, and most of my RSI have gone away once I switched to a long arm because I think you just underestimate how much pressure is on your hands pushing that quilt through. The regulated stitches, it's almost something you forget once you've got a long arm. And when I went back to do a bit of free motion quilting on my genome because I was doing an online class in it, I was like, I completely forgot how to do this. I can't, so I've just got too used to the wonderful regulated stitching. When I taught free motion quilting actually for a long time in the shop, and I was mainly saying to people things like, move your hands more, take your foot off the pedal more, because it was all about that, trying to get your stitches to be not too small and not too big, somewhere in the middle. And there's a lot of control you need to get between your hands and your feet. And then to keep it there when you're moving around, it's hard. It takes all of that out the way and all your stitches are perfectly the same. They're easier and more natural to draw. So when I was teaching free motion quilting, I would say to people, you're going to be drawing with a fixed pen and you're moving the paper underneath it. And that's how you work free motion quilting. Now, your brain does quickly adjust to this odd way of drawing, but it's much more natural to be holding the pen and moving over the paper as you are with a long arm. I actually think that my drawing skills have got so much better because of free motion quilting. I used to think I was, better at I was okay at free motion quilting because I was quite good at drawing. But I actually think it's worked the other way because I didn't draw for years and years and years. And I did this sort of sketchbook challenge thing. And I was like, oh, I'm much better at this than I thought. And I think it's all the free motion quilting. It's the same sort of muscle memory. So if you're free motion quilting, you're probably getting better at drawing the whole time too. Quilts finish flatter. Now, this is something I picked up from Judy Kirk when she did the webinar about putting quilts into different categories for Festival of Quilts. Really fascinating. One of the questions was about trying to get your quilts as flat as possible. And she said the best way to get really flat hanging quilts is to quilt them on a long arm. Nothing is better than that because they're all held stable together as they move through as your quilting happens, and it just keeps that flatness. So that's, if you're putting them into shows and things, that's a real benefit. And it's also a lot of fun. People are often scared to use the long arm. I don't know, they've put too much expectations on themselves. They think people are going to laugh at whatever they do. I've had friends here that are like, oh, I'm just a bit nervous. I'm just do it. It's only me here. And they're immediately like, oh my God, this is so fun. I'm loving it. Look, and they're always better than they think. So yeah, it's just fun. And people don't realize how much fun it is until they try. So I got the Moxie. I loved it straight away. And I started to do this, which is I call interlocking rainbows. Take the square out and you get this. I was doing it. It was something I'd been doing quite a bit on the genome ahead of getting the Moxie. So it was a really easy pattern for me to do. One of the other things that I was doing a lot now, sold the shop, not teaching all these same classes in rotation. I had all these class samples. I wanted to make loads of quilts with these class samples. I've been storing them all up. Didn't want to give them to anyone else to do. I wanted to make them. They were going to be lovely quilts. So this was improv house class, which I'd taught for ages and always had to do a new sample. And this went off to a charity that I make. It went off to Siblings Together, I think. I do lots of quilts for a social bite charity, which is quilts for the social bite village, which my husband designed the tiny houses for, where homeless people kind of go off the streets and they can kind of remake their lives there for about a year before they go to a permanent address, and everybody gets a quilt. This one didn't go for there, but I still make a lot for that. I think this, because it's quite a fun one, went to Siblings Together. And the other thing, so this wasn't a charity quilt, but another class I had a lot of samples for was my tiny improv streetscape class, and I had all these little houses and little trees, and I would always had this idea to put them all around the edge and create this sort of world, which I did. But then I was like, what am I going to put in the middle of this? If it had just been plain, it would have been very imbalanced. So I came up with this way of using my freehand foundation techniques, like you saw on the dandelion clock and adding in needle turn applique details. And I called this Journey to the Center of the Earth. And I turned the center part of that into a class for itself, which I taught at the QuiltCon virtual retreat they had in 2021. So I have a bit of a problem because I use up the class samples, and by doing that, I inadvertently create a new class, and then I have to teach that, and then I have more class samples, and then I have to think of something different to do that, and it kind of just goes on and on. So this is a quilt I made with Journey to the Center of the Earth class samples that I had taught, and it's called Journey to the Center of a Flower, and it's a giant one. It's about nearly 80 inches, and this is all of that freehand foundation piecing, but the petals are all needle turn appliqued, apart from the spiky ones, and there's lots of little needle turn applique details in there. And what I did with this one was in fact, I'm just talking about that quilt. I haven't actually talked about the quilting on this, because this is when I decided, right, I've done a few testy quilts on the Moxie. Let's see what I can do. I'm going to try and get fancy. So I did do lots of sort of fancy stuff on here, a bit like that dandelion clock. Let's take an area, a rim of the improv curves, and we'll build, I'll do all eyes in this one, and in this one I'll do all of these little things. So it's like almost having an armory of different motifs you can stick in, so everything's a little bit different. And I use variegated thread for the first time. I started to use Aurifil 43. I'm an Aurifil ambassador, so as soon as I felt brave enough, I started to use the Aurifil threads. The 43 is their long arm thread on the machine, and I wasn't sure after I'd done it. I kind of regretted the variegated, but it looks so I'm okay with it now. And then I did little branches in the trees and things, and then around the edge is some square interlocking rainbows and round interlocking rainbows. So I was really pleased with this one. I put, took longer, and this was the first one. And I think I asked Liz for advice about how to start from the middle of a quilt outwards and how to sort of baste it to start with and get to the middle, and then I started to work downwards, and then I'd go back to the middle, with it just on one roll, one of the rollers, and then quilt back the other way. So this is the first time I hadn't just gone from the top to the bottom of the quilt. So that was a whole new strategy. So then with this one, I was like, right, I'm going to get on with the matchstick quilting, finally feeling like this is what I wanted to do. And I stupidly didn't go from the middle. I went from the top to the bottom, and it would have been a lot better to go from the middle with all these curves and things. But it is pretty flat, actually. It's not too bad. But that was something I'd learned for another one. And the other thing I did was I left spaces between those very tight lines, and then I put hand quilting later using 12 Aurifil 12 weight cotton, just because I wanted that. I love to mix hand quilting with machine quilting. It just makes me happy to see that hand texture, and I just love the details you get from it. So now I was like, I'm just doing straight line quilting forever. The channel locker was, I think it's the most amazing thing. Now I know a lot of you people have fancy ones where you've got some, is it magnetic or it's something else where you press a button and you don't have to walk around. Some of my friends up here have all bought Amaris, and they're all been telling me about on the retreat I've just been how amazing this button is. I'm still happy to walk around my machine and do the little channel locker. You get your steps in, you're moving about. If you're doing tiny little lines very close together, you can just nudge it. You don't have to move at all. And Liz did tell me that's okay, so I don't feel bad saying that. And so I started to do what I call random plaid grid. Now, I'd done this on smaller quilts before a few years back and really liked the kind of modern look of it. Also, it's a super lazy way of doing grids because you don't have to mark anything out or measure it. And oh, I've got to do an inch grid or an inch and a half. You just do whatever space you want to. Make it really random. These two very close together, that one further apart, somewhere in between. Try not to overthink it. Just going backwards and forwards, and then you take it off, put it back the other way, go backwards and forwards the other way, and you get a random plaid grid. And you can mix it up a bit, make it very tight. This is a really tight one, make it a bit of a looser one. This is, by this time, the Thread House, we were doing our block of the month clubs. So we'd started this during lockdown, a whole year's worth of monthly blocks, different techniques, video tutorials to go with them. We did 3 of them, and then we went on to a more organized online quilting academy. And this was the second one. It was called Freebird. And then this is another class sample quilt, Improv Flowers, which I taught for a long time. I had loads of these samples, put them together, created various new tendrils to go all around them, and did another tight random plaid quilting all over it using Aurifil 43 and just a sort of cream color. And you'll see these have all got faced binding, again something I really like to do to give a more modern look. And this one won first prize at the Festival of Quilts in the Quilters Guild Challenge in 2022. So, and it's my favorite quilt, obviously because of that, because I've got a trophy, and it hangs on my stairs. And this is another one I started during lockdown. As soon as lockdown started, I started this temperature quilt. The Modern Quilt Club put a call out for a special exhibition of temperature quilts at QuiltCon 2022. So I started it as soon as I had time, which is when all my traveling and teaching things were cancelled in March 2020. So I think it starts on March 2024, and it is the darkest. The background color is the lowest temperature, and the circle is the highest temperature. And I decided to add a mood aspect to it. So I drew up the circle by hand. I wanted them just to be wonky, improv, organic circles, not perfect circles. So every day I drew up the circle on paper, which became my template, depending on how I was feeling. So if it's a good day, big circle, bad day, small circle. So they're a lot more. It was a bit more of a roller coaster year than I was expecting. So I thought it'll be about the same because I'm quite emotionally stable. But no, they were all over the place. And I was saying, I did actually do this talk the other day, and I was telling them that I think I did it like last week when something big was happening in the world. So there's a giant circle there, which was like it's so big, it sort of covers the whole of the square. And it was when Trump was voted out last time. So it seems kind of ironic to be talking about this now. Didn't, I was so happy. And now he's back. And something I wouldn't say amongst an American audience, but I think I'm safe to say that now. I think we're all feeling a little bit uneasy about what's happening next. But this was a really great thing to do, made me very present, thinking every day about how I felt. And it was the first of an obsession with temperature quilts. So there's more coming. So this one was the one you saw at the start. It's called Fruit Salad. And it's more class samples from another class that developed from all these others called Pattern Rings. And I wanted to do the random plaid, but I'm getting a bit bored. I always want something a bit different. So I decided to do it, but with double lines. So instead of a single line, I did two close lines together. They're maybe a quarter of an inch apart, but made them randomly plaidish. And this one, I was doing this a couple of years ago because I wanted it for the first sustainability category at Festival of Quilts. I was so pleased they did a sustainable quilt category. It's something I really think about a lot, about us not using too much fabric, too much new fabric. So but it did take me about a year to get it finished. So I made it all as a sort of, it's called Beach Canopy. And the idea is very abstract, blue sky, low contrast sort of sky, looking up at the through the canopy of the trees and just seeing all the leaves with the sort of sunlight above them. And I use all these old clothes and old curtains and bedclothes and things like that to create this improv low contrast background. And then I use lots of green scraps because I had a lot of green scraps to make all the leaves. So, but what I did was I quilted before I put the leaves on, I quilted it. So I used a very, very tight random plaid. And that was because I decided to quilt it using a recycled wadding, which has a ridiculous amount of loft to it. So I felt like I had to sort of press this down with very, very close quilting lines to sort of compress it. So the quilting was all done. And then I pinned all the leaves on and needle turn applique them, which is quite difficult to do because I had got quite a bulky quilt. But they're all close to the edge, not right in the middle. So you would have been very difficult to have done it right in the middle. But that's why it took me about a year to finish it. And then I just was like, oh, the leaves are a bit fluffy. So I added an extra little line of hand quilting along the vein there. And this is another journey to the center of the earth using up my class samples. Right, I've done a giant flower. What about an eye? So I started these off with a slightly elongated quarter circle so that it could become an eye. So the first one was already done like this. It's called Eye Catcher. And I went very, very tiny, very close with my matchstick quilting. Still love that look. And what I did with this, it's got just a grey background, and you can just about see this on the close up. I used the variegated turquoise and thread from Aurifil. Their 43 is quite a thick thread. It's the 3-ply 40 weight, but the 3-ply means and all their other threads are 2-ply. It gives it the appearance of like a 28 weight, so quite a thick thread. And it created like people thought I had used a patterned fabric, not a plain grey fabric in the background, because these variegated lines of thread running through it kind of looks almost like it's a woven background you've put it onto. So it's really unusual technique, and I'm going to try it again on something else, just using the thread to create a patterned background. This is called watermelon eyelashes, and the fruit salad one came because I started to teach this one. The original block in the middle was from teaching Journey to the Centre of the Earth. When I taught that one at the QuiltCon together, my students came up with all these great ideas, which I then thought I've got to capture these or I'll forget them. So I made that block in the middle with lots of their fun ideas, just quite a plain one of just these rings of the patterns. And then I kept going with this because I started to teach this as a class called Pattern Rings. And I set it in this kind of fancy New York beauty styling, but with extra background to create a bit of negative space. And now when I went to quilt this, I'd been doing all that grid quilting, no free motion quilting. I'd sort of lost a bit of my muscle memory with free motion quilting. What I thought I would do was to do some fancy quilting in those curves, like I'd done with the dandelion clock and the tiny improv streetscape, and then just do lines in the background with the channel locker. So that was the plan. But because I hadn't been doing it for ages, I started to try and do curved lines in those curves, just some curved parallels, and they were just terrible. They looked really bad. I thought, oh, panicked. But I thought, right, leave them. Don't unpick them yet. Don't ever unpick until you really have to. Just leave it. Let's keep going. And it was on the machine for about 6 weeks, and I just get a quilt on and it's off. Within a day or two. So this one was really difficult. I lost all my confidence, thought I couldn't do it anymore. Eventually, I finished it. And what I did was I unpicked the bad areas and I just did them with hand quilting. So that got that, that's one way around it. And since then, I've been really practicing those sort of curvy shapes, and I've got a lot better because I was like, yeah, you've just lost it. You've got to get back to free motion quilting. So then I did this one. This was the third of the Thread House quilts, block of the month quilts. It's called Summer Breeze. I'm like, come on, I've got to start concentrating on my free motion quilting. I've forgotten how to do it with all this channel locking. So I wanted this to have a kind of watery look. So I did some pebbles and I did these spirals with sort of two lines very close together. So they look a bit like ripples on a stream. And then I was like, what else can I do that's watery? And I did mussels, which wouldn't really fit in with a pond, but never mind. And what I did with them in these kind of swathes. So I hadn't done this before, kind of graffiti quilting type thing of going from a swathe of pebbles into a swathe of the mussels. And I was like, I quite like this idea. So this is kind of giving me ideas for what I can do next. Now, at this point, now things are changing in my house. I've got that room with my long arm in, but we're about to knock down that part of the house and rebuild it all. So I decided that my long arm has to be packed away and it's going to have to go into my studio, into my little studio. But I had this quilt top, more class samples. This was called my Freehand Curves Landscape class. It's now called the Poplars class, and it's available as a one-off online class at the Thread House Academy. And I had kept making these into, I had a massive amount, and this is like 100 by 95 inches, a really big quilt. So I had got the Moxie with the 10-foot frame because I had the room for it. So I was like, right, let's get this quilted on that 10-foot frame because I'm not going to have the room when I'm going to have to go down to an 8-foot frame. So the idea was to just do these very simple waves, something that would be super easy to do on just a domestic machine with a walking foot. I used to get my beginners to start off quilting with this rather than straight lines because it kind of hides a multitude of sins on their piecing. So just these very close waves. And I was going to add in some hand quilting, a bit like that other one, but when I finished it, I was like, it's massive and it doesn't need it. So this was all I did with that. And I think it worked really well because it's quite a busy quilt. It didn't need any more than that. And so then I moved it into the studio and put it down to an 8-foot frame. And do you know what? I've actually got an 82-inch quilt quilted on that 8-foot frame. So I don't think I'm never gonna make another one like this. I can't even store it. It's way too big. And so heavy. So, I'm happy with that's my one and only huge quilt. And I don't ever need to go any bigger than 80 inches really. So this is bringing us up to about 18 months ago when I was like, right, come on, let's get back to that idea of very simple free motion quilting that looks modern. I want to do free motion quilting, not just grids all the time, but I want it to look modern. So this is me going, okay, remember the square interlocking rainbows and the squirrels, right? Let's just put those together again and see what happens and go from sort of swathes of them. So I did this on this quilt. It's called The Hills Are Alive. And I think this one, I didn't even add in anything else, just those two. And occasionally I would have spaces, like I would build myself into a right angle by doing this. So I would just do these little curves. Remember, I wanted to practice doing those kind of curve lines. Let's get lots of practice doing those. This was very helpful for that. And then I would have like a straight edge and I was like, right, let's do some semicircles, building some semicircles. And then occasionally you'd end up with an area that you could just fill with little lines and create little boxed ruler work area, not using rulers at the moment. And I thought, oh, do you know what? I love this. This is it. I finally found it. I finally got what I've been looking for all these years. Modern FMQ. I call it modern improv doodles, and it's become my main obsession. So the next ones of these are looking at where I took this from next. This quilt is a group quilt by my sewing group called the Golden Bobbins, and we were having an exhibition last March at the Scottish Quilt Show, and we wanted to have one that said that we are the Golden Bobbins of Edinburgh. So we decided to do it in Morse code. So of course nobody could read it. So this says we are the Golden Bobbins of Edinburgh, and are all our 9 names in different blocks. So the top left-hand bit is we are the, and then the golden bit in the centre is Golden Bobbins of Edinburgh, and then all the other blocks are sort of Helen, Irene, Heather. Mine is Joanne because Joe's just too small, and we did them in the Morse code using my freehand foundation piecing technique so that it wasn't just lines, it kind of had a design to it. So I quilted it with that whole idea I was just showing you, the difference being that I decided to outline the Morse code sections, but I didn't use a ruler. And they're I'm not very, I was like, my lines are very wavy and it would have been better with a ruler. So that's something I learned. But overall, I really like the look of it. And then this was another temperature quilt. So this is called my sea urchin temperature quilt. And um, basically 1 month is it's 2023, and January is top left and it goes January, February, March, and then snakes back down. So, and the bottom right is December. And then I was using the same idea of the modern improv doodle, but I added in some extra bits, getting a bit more confident here. One of the swathes I did that you can't really see is what I would call a square meander. I'm showing you that in a minute. And then I would just do these curvy sections and then outline them with things that you would see cropping up in my improv piece quilt and some zigzags. And I just had a bit more fun with it. And I was like, this is perfect. Kind of got an Aztec-y look to it, just building in areas of petals and zigzags, something I'd always done anyway on free motion quilting. This one is called Supernova. So I developed some of these ideas, the sea urchin, the dandelion clock, into a new class for the Academy, which was out just a few months ago, and you can buy, called Supernova. And this quilt, which you'll see the whole of it in a moment, is like an exploding supernova because the theme was stars. But I wanted to teach this, all of our terms have a different theme. So it was the star theme. I couldn't work out how to do a star using this technique, and I wanted to do this technique. So it ended up being a supernova. So what I did with this was I kind of did a very boring version of it for the background, and then I used a ruler to outline those wedges, learnt my lesson after the Morse code, and then just kind of added in on all these bits in the areas there. I'm not so happy with the center again. I'd really struggle with my curved still. It's always good to know that you've got plenty of room for improvement. It's okay, but I feel like it could have been a lot better. I wasn't like, oh, I'm happy. I was like, yeah, it's all right. But I like the effect of it and using the rulers a lot in the background. So I got really straight edges, on really straight lines. That's what it looks like altogether. This is taking us bang up to almost date with these. These are the ones I've added in since we did this at Festival Quilts. This one's called Doodlebug. It had a lot of show you it's got a lot of negative space. And I thought I'm going to have so much fun now. I'm really feeling confident with this modern improv doodle. Let's just go wild with it. So it's a much closer version of it. And I added in interlocking rainbows as well as the square rainbows, the curved rainbows, and just lots of areas where I would just build in a straight bit using the ruler and then just do petals and then curves and then bars. And yeah, just had lots of fun. And grids, that was a new thing I put in. Instead of just having an area with just straight lines in, I used the ruler to put areas of very tight grids. And I really, really like how that one worked out. And then I did this one behind me, the one that I haven't got a picture of the whole quilt because it's really long. It's sort of 55 by 85. It's like a big jukeboxy thing. And I haven't been able to hang it outside or get anyone to hold it. But so what I did with this was going back to a relatively plain, simple improv doodle, bit like that first one, The Hills Are Alive. Because there's a lot going on in this quilt. It just didn't need loads of text, tight texture, but I wanted it to have that overall, it's kind of low contrasty background type thing just over the top of it. So I think that worked well. So now this is the part where I would have gone over to the long arm and started to do some practicing. So I'm just going to talk you through here a progression of very easy shapes to getting to And sort of all the things I've been talking about with those quilts and getting to the modern improv doodle I'm doing now. So we start off with loops. When I would do loops, and I still would if I was doing a charity quilt, I could get a big charity quilt done in about an hour and a half on the long arm doing loops. So single loops, double loops, change direction, and meander everywhere with loops. Easier than that stipple, and you can just build up a beautiful tight crinkly texture with it. If you can do the loops, you can easily do the loopy leaves. So you're just doing a trailing line, stop and do a little figure of eight, or go around one and then around the other, and then carry on and get a loopy leaf. Then if you can do that, you can put a few more loops on and create a loopy flower that you trail. And then the next step would be to create a circle in the middle of your petals and go around and then travel around that circle to come out the other side of the flower, so that you're not just coming out the same bit each time. And then you can just trail around your quilt this way, and a really nice way of doing an overall easy pattern and really getting a lot of practice in with your FMQ. So then I went on to doing things with circles. Well, the first thing I did with circles was a quilt with just lots of squares, and I did a circle inside a circle in each one, and then went off and did the next one and just worked my way around there. So I got really good at circles. And that's the sort of thing I'm showing you there, how you can go into a circle, into the middle, another round, travel around, back out the other way. You've got your pebbles there, as I was saying before, lots of build up, lots of traveling to get around those pebbles, builds up a lot of thickness of thread and is very time consuming. So you could try my coffee bean idea, where you go around, and then when you finish, you go through the middle of your circle to travel to the next one. And then you go through it at angles to travel around, sometimes twice because you want to come out at a different area. And then there's that big blousy uh, flower I was talking about. So circle, go in, do another circle, or you can start with the smaller circle, come out and do a bigger circle. And then you're going around doing a petal, leave a space, do another petal. Once you've gone all the way around, you then echo your petals into the space in between, trail off to another one. And when I would do that, I would do big circles, small circles, make them sort of all fit together. So there would be a lot of difference in scale. The muscles we were talking about before, and what a lovely, easy way that is for traveling around um, from one end of a quilt to another. I really like doing the muscles. And so you can start with those, and then there's lots of different ways you can do variations on them. First of all, you can just, instead of having the curve to the muscles, you can just put a point at it and you turn it into a flame or a leaf. So that's another way of doing it. Things I would then do would, once I'd got the idea of this, I would then surround those muscles or flames with different things. So I would surround them with petals or with spikes. You can also fill up some of the lines between the echoes around those muscles with pebbles. You can fill up the center of them with them. You can fill up the center of them with lines using the rulers. Other things I did was sometimes I would put the lines close together and further apart to give myself a bit. So I would have two lines close together and then one apart, and then two lines close together, and that could change it a bit, or that kind of kicking out a bit more at the sort of base of the muscles. So lots of different ways that you can alter that. And these are my interlocking rainbows. So on the left hand side, I started this drawing with the rainbow in the center. Did this interlocking rainbow, which is like a rainbow. You go around, you do a little line, and you go back the other way, and then you go around, go up again. Then you travel halfway up the rainbow, and you put another rainbow coming out of the side of there, and then you do another rainbow that maybe goes between both of those rainbows, and you work around till you get back to the bottom, and you go straight across and do another rainbow that's kind of mirror image, and then you just keep building out from there. Another thing I did only very recently was to think maybe I could put petals around rainbows. So that's me showing you how you can surround your rainbows with petals, and then on you go with more. Maybe not every one, just some of them. You could try putting spikes around them as well. And then there's the square interlocking rainbow there, very much done in the same way. And these are some other bits of those motifs I was talking about that I put into that simple improv doodle. You've got the square meander. So this is, I find, probably the most stressful one out of any of these because you do feel like you've got to make a lot of decisions quite quickly, as you do with the usual meander. But try not to overthink it and just create these shapes and they cut into each other and they just meander around. And I'll do this for a bit and then I'll change into doing more square interlocking rainbows, maybe add a little spiral there. And then these sort of areas where I'll have a bit of a space. What am I going to do now? Let's just create a semicircle, little hump, then maybe go back the other way, then maybe a wider hump, and then I can fill that with things like little bars, petals, or spikes like there. And then I've got an area I can maybe fill it with lines or a grid using the ruler. And finally, this is me kind of putting it all together. Some square interlocking rainbows. I pretty much always start with those because I find those the most natural bits. When I've built up a little bit of a right angle, I'll start to put in those kind of drunkard's path curves. They might go on beyond the space for them where I'm actually making them more of a shape with straight lines. Maybe then I'll put some petals around the top of those. I've got that square meander going on there that can very easily then turn back into square interlocking rainbows or a spiral. And then they're leaving spaces where nothing else is happening, and I'll just put a ruler and put some very straight lines in. So you can have a lot of fun with this. Obviously, the thing about free motion quilting is I feel like it's a very personal thing, and you need to find something that you feel comfortable doing that comes very easily to you. That might not be any of these. There are other things that I don't find easy to do, you might find easy to do. So you kind of need to find something that you're enjoying doing. It so there's a nice rhythm to it. It's coming easily to you. And then just develop that and really do loads of that and just look at ways that you can do variations of that until you feel really confident. And it's taken me 30 years. Right. So this is just a little bit here of what you can do, some basic rules about how I would think about free motion quilting designs. So moving between shapes. I started off with what I would call trailing, just those little lines between everything. The other thing is traveling. That's where you're moving from one thing to the other by going on top of a line that you've already done. But like we did with the pebbles, with some of the interlocking rainbows and things, you're having to go along some of the line you've done. The same with interlocking sort of spirals and kissing, something I haven't done loads of, but it's a really, if you want to look into it, have a look at some of the Christina Camelli books to see how she explains it. And then any simple shape can be echoed, surrounded, or filled. So what I've really been showing you with things like the mussels or that sort of semicircle, you create a shape, you can echo it, you can surround it with some sort of motif, and then you can fill it up with lines, grids, maybe all sorts of things. Like I was filling up the center of those dandelion clocks with triangles and sort of odd anemone shapes. So tips for free motion quilting. This is really for anything. I mean, for domestic and long arm, practice the design on paper first. I always draw it out on paper first. It's helping keep that, locking it into my sort of muscle memory. It just, you just need to feel that flow with your hands on the paper first. It does something to your brain. And then practice a design on a quilt sandwich. Have something, even if it's, sometimes if it's something I'm quite confident with, I might just have an area at the side of my quilt on the long arm, on top of the wadding, and I can practice here before I go into the main thing. Or if it's something that I'm trying out before I commit to the quilt, I will put a practice sandwich on and do quite a bit of quilting first. Relax, don't overthink it and have fun. All things easier said than done, and just practice some more because it's just like learning to fly a plane. The pilot has to do 100 hours, whatever it is, and that's what free motion quilting is. You've got to pack those hours in. And here is some information. Now you all know how to find a pinhole, hopefully by now. And then there's some bits here about I have got a free motion quilting masterclass. We've got a quilting masterclass online class, which is me on free motion quilting at my domestic machine. Lynn Goldsworthy on straight line quilting with a walking foot. She is the queen of that. And Karen is doing hand quilting, which is something she pretty much hand quilts all her quilts these days. So it's all within a £40 online class. And I am super bossy in my class, bossier than I am ever usually, because free motion quilting is a lot of rules and sort of, make sure you do this and do that. So, excuse my stern quite strict demeanor. And then there's my blog and my online store and everything else you need. If you something comes up after this and you're like, oh, I wish I'd asked this, then reach out to me through my websites, blogs. Just Google Joe Avery and get in touch. Anything you want to know. So, are there? Oh, there's 11 in the chat. Let's see. And you can unmute yourselves now if you want. And I think, right. So, Liz, you've been answering some of these.
Yeah, there's just a few things that I answered, particularly about the channel locks, in case people needed to know
Okay.
about
Yeah.
that. But actually, if you go to the top of the chat, you'll see there's some questions there. But if everybody would like, anybody's got any questions, just put them on the chat now.
Sure. So I think it's Shelley was saying when quilting on the long arm and using a number of designs, do you plan out your motifs ahead of time or do you just, I mean, I will think about them, Shelley. So, because I've been doing a lot of these and I sort of tried out the first one and went, okay, I'm going to try this out with the square interlocking rainbows and the, square, see how I get on. And then after doing a bit of that, I'm like, I need something else. So then I'll start to throw something else in. And then, because I've got a little bit of an armory of different ones, if I'm, for instance, thinking about this quilt, I'll be thinking at this. I don't want to do as many as I did in the doodle bug. That took ages. This is a really big quilt. So I'm just going to do, less of these motifs. But over the last 18 months, I've kind of built up, I've tried out a lot of these motifs I've been doing that I was just showing you. So I can kind of pick and choose. I might go, oh, I'll stick them all in this one, like the doodle bug, and I'll see where it takes me. Let's play about. While I was doing that, I was coming up with some new ones because I felt confident enough that I think if I was just going to try something new out on a quilt and go, right, I'm committing to do this, then I probably have to put a lot more thought and practice in. But because I know I can just go, if this one isn't working out very well, I won't do that one again. I'll just do these other ones. And if I try that one out and it's fun, then I'll keep doing that. So I think what I've found here is a little bit of a easy access way into quilting because I keep changing up what I'm doing. That's the whole point of it. So you can't sort of box yourself into a cul-de-sac where oh my God, I'm committed to this. It's not working very well, but I've got to do the whole quilt. So yeah, it's quite nice to be able to go, yeah, that didn't work out. Abandon that one. Let's just carry on doing the square interlocking rainbows. They're easy. I can do those. And oh, hang on a minute, I've got an idea. Like I started to do lots of sort of teeth. And then also with the square interlocking rainbows, I started to just round off the edges a bit and it was giving a more kind of mid-century modern look. So as you're doing it, I'm kind of discovering new ideas. Trying to remember them is hard actually. But yeah, so it's a kind of mixture between half planning them, half practicing, half making up as I go along. Let's see what else is here. On the deadline, did I mark it first? No. Do you know what? I never mark anything on a quilt for free motion quilting, and I never have done because I cannot actually follow a drawn line on a quilt. I tried to
Okay.
do the quilting from the back with the pantograph once, and it was a total disaster. It would have been easy for me to have looked at that pattern and just drawn it by eye than to try and follow a line. Now, I just can't do it. So I've never marked anything out. I just think the idea is you draw with the quilt, with the needle. I
Mhm.
mean, that's the way I do these days. When I'm doing that a lot with kind of other things like cutting out trees just with scissors, and not drawing them first. So I'm quite into that sort of thing. And that's just something I've always done. I can't actually follow a line. I just draw. I just use the needle to draw with. And I think if you trust yourself and practice, you don't need to marker, which is why I never do anything that's like symmetrical. I mean, I can't do that. It's not because I'm going, oh, it's so boring. It's because I like physically I can't do that. So I've had to find other ways of getting the look I want with not having those skills. What thread do I like? So um I really like the Aurifil 43 because it's got quite a thick look. I don't like the glide. I don't like shiny threads. Okay, so I know lots of people love the glide. I don't like the glide.
Mhm.
I feel like it splits a lot and it's all shiny. I like matte threads. So the other one I love is the So Fine. So I'm quite boring with threads as well. So I pretty much use a lot of kind of just off white or pale grey occasionally I'll go into those variegateds. I've got a plan for some variegated, and I've just ordered some new Aurifil variegated for a new temperature quilt for another temperature quilt that I'm
Hmm.
doing. So usually, I don't think you need a lot of color unless you're doing something specific. It's the sort of texture in the background. So sometimes I might use a darker gray. I think I did for some of the darker gray backgrounds. But yeah, so either the Sofine or the Aurifil 43, pretty much my go-to threads. The Sofine's nice if you don't want it to stand out quite as much. Joey's talking about the, all right, so you talked about the channel lockers. Do you applique circles on the temperature quilt? Yes, they were all needle turn applique circles on that temperature quilt that were done by drawing up the actual circle on a piece of sort of heavier than usual paper. I was actually using all the cover envelopes from the quilting magazines. Really good recycling. You cut that out, you cut your fabric out a quarter of an inch bigger, you gather stitch around the fabric, pull it up with the template inside, press it both sides, pop the template out. That's gone. I only used it one at a time. And then pinned it down and then sew around it. So that's how I did all of that. Can you show a close up of the muscle quilting? Do you know, I don't think I actually put any. Oh, I tell you what, I can. I'll go back. I don't know whether I've got one.
I think Rachel answered her own question and said it's
Right.
been showing the last few slides. You did, I think you did have your
Well, I
muscle.
did show you the muscles in the drawing, so maybe that will
Yeah.
have done. But maybe I'll try and add in the next presentation more of a, there was the Starlights quilt that was all muscles, but I don't know whether I had any great close-ups of that, and that's a long gone quilt. So, but I can try and do a close-up before it goes onto the slideshow.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kathy. That was great. Thank you. That was a nice feedback. Yes, it's liberating. It's all about liberating. Oh, okay, cool. Thank you. I saw that. Right. Okay, those are all nice feedbacks. But if anyone would like to actually, ask me a question with your voice, please do now.
Yes.
That's fine.
What's your favorite batting?
Great question. So, and you know what? That is always the first question. I'm like, oh, when I do this other time, why hasn't anyone asked me about the wadding or the batting yet? So
Yep.
for many, many years, I'm very boring, and if I find something that works, I don't like change.
Right.
So I used Hobbs Heirloom 80/20, and it's what I sold in my shop. So I would, have lots to hand. But I recently started to try the Vlizoline 80/20, which is a German make, and I
Mm.
absolutely love it for the long arm for one particular reason. So what I found with the Hobbs Heirloom, and I think it's great for a domestic quilting. It's really nice. It's quite floppy. And what happens on a long arm is it creeps in. Every time you turn it on, you've got to kind of stretch out the wooding or it starts to creep into the middle of the quilt. But with the Vlizoline, it is meant to be 80/20, but it's got this sort of almost felted quality to it. It's really stable. It doesn't creep in. I mean, you have to keep, I would keep an eye on it, and it's just gives you a much more stable, flatter quilt at the end of it. So I think for the sort of quilts I'm doing, which are kind of, for exhibiting these days, sort of more competition quilts and not so much floppy bed quilts, and that they're done on the long arm. I love the Vlizoline 80/20 and I'm just using it all the time. I have to say, it's probably not so easy to get through a domestic machine because it's quite firm, though it's what Lynn Goldsworthy uses. She doesn't free motion quilt really, she does everything on her domestic Janome, but with walking foot, and she uses that. So, maybe it works really well for it. So I just think it's worth trying out. I don't know whether you can get it in the States, but you can certainly get it in the UK. I get it from a UK wholesaler who sells to all the shops. So if you have a look for Vlizoline 80/20, um, and maybe, you can get a small bit to try out. But I just think for a long arm, it's such a great wadding.
Mm.
So that's my answer about that. I'm going to type Vlizoline here because it's a weird, it's what used to be Vilene, but they changed it for some reason to Vlizoline. Like they did, Jif turned to Sif. It's like one of these weird European things. So yeah, I don't know why. Yes, any other questions?
Do you ever double bat your quilts for extra loft?
No.
No.
No, I feel like that would be way too, yeah, I mean, no, I don't think they need to be any warmer. No, I've never done that, but I have to say that Tatiana, my friend, who is an amazing long armer and has a handy quilter, she did some quilts for me in kind of collaboration, and she did a double one once. And also Kelly Orr, another handy quilter person who's in our Golden Bobbies, she's done some with double, group
Hmm.
quilts of ours, and they have been that's been a really amazing look. But yeah, it just looks like it might be a lot more trouble and expense. So not broke, don't
It was
fix it.
just suggested to me for one I've got sort of cooking that maybe I'd be better double
Right.
batting it if you like. And I thought, oh, well,
Well, I've never tried it, so
that's
I
new
don't think
to
I'm the
me.
right person. Liz might have some thoughts on that, but I've not tried it.
Yeah, I've certainly I've done it, and I did a dream big. So I did a
Oh
dream
yeah.
big sort of improv with a lot of feathers. So it fills really nicely. So it's eight. I used eight Hobbs 80/20,
Mm.
and then the Hobbs wool on the top, and that's
Oh,
actually quite a common combination for those who double bat. Um,
okay.
yeah, and it does. I mean, I think with certainly the rounded quilting designs, it does create a beautiful dimension and structure to the feathers and things, and it really puffs it up a bit. So I love it. I love the Hobbs wool, and I've used it without having two layers. And so where I'm looking for something that's also going to be used as a wall hanging, having the 80/20 behind it gives the kind of structure and stability that you need for that. So
Yeah.
I
Mm.
think, yeah, it does work well.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much out there, isn't it? I often find it a bit bamboozling, all the different waddings. So that's why I tend to sort of have stuck to one wadding that I was sure of for years.
Yeah.
Been quite a big
Many,
thing to move slightly over on brand.
sure. Many years ago when I did a class with it was Harriet Hargrave who was teaching machine quilting, and out of that came, wouldn't it be nice if there were like packs of samples of the wadding? So that's when I developed the wadding sample packs that Cotton Patch still do. So
Okay.
you can buy like a whole set of different waddings and then experiment with what you like. So Sue, if you want to see what it would look like, do a sample before you
Yeah.
commit perhaps to a bigger piece.
Good idea. Definitely. Yeah. That's a good
Okay.
Can I
idea.
ask about thread colour? Can you hear me?
Yes. Thread color.
Do you that quilt behind you? Have you
Yes.
changed thread colour in the background when you've gone into the black?
No,
So
that's way
what
too
colour?
much
You
trouble for
can't see
me.
it. What colour is it? The
It's
thread.
just a pale grey. To like a like what I would a dove grey, a pale grey. Yeah, I mean I yes, that's I wouldn't do that. That's too much trouble. I'm not into any trouble. That's why I like like overall patterns. Just just get on with it. But I've done it occasionally. I've changed color. I think on that tiny improv one, I did some variegated turquoise and I had some variegated sort of charcoaly color grays, and then I went into just some plain ones. So, I mean, that's probably the most I've ever done. But yeah, I don't usually. More from laziness than anything else. Any other
Any
questions?
other? No, sounds like there's no more questions. But
Fantastic class. This was just great. Loved it, loved it.
Thank
yeah,
you.
I've got a
Diane.
question. Sorry.
Yeah,
Can you remind us of your favourite threads? Aurifil something with a number and one other
yeah.
one.
So Aurifil developed one specifically for a long arm. So it's 40 stroke 3 because they have a
Okay.
40. So all the Aurifil threads are 2-ply, but they developed this 3-ply one specifically for the long arm. So the 40 weight, just general 40 weight, is a 2-ply. So it's like 40 stroke 3, and it only comes on big cones. And it has the appearance of what they would call a 28 weight, which is counterintuitive with threads. The smaller the number, the thicker the weight of the thread. So yeah, I really like that. And cotton threads do put a lot more lint in your machine, but I haven't otherwise really had any problems with them. Obviously, you get more fluff, but probably less with Aurifil than other brands.
Okay. And there was another one that you like.
Yes, the So Fine. Who
So
makes that
fine.
one, Liz? Who makes So Fine? I usually get it from
so
you guys.
fine is superior.
Superior. Yeah, yeah. You can get that one from Liz.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, we got online.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then someone's asked, oh, Shelley's asked, do you bury your threads? That's a good question, actually.
Yeah.
So
hmm
nice.
Yes,
Yeah.
I always bury afterwards. I bury take them all, to the back, tie them in a knot, and thread them. I have got this amazing thing that you get in Germany. It's a little, I can't remember what it's called. It's like a Nadelstrava or something, and it's like a little needle with a little lasso on the end. I mean, you can do these kind of with threads and things. So I used to use easy threading needles, right? But then they
Mm.
often break the thread. Somebody got me this. I'll have to try and remember what it's called. I've lost the packaging, but you can only get them in Germany. And a German fan brought one for me at Festival of Quilts. I was like, oh, what's this? Honestly, it's the
Wow.
best thing. It's something like Nadel. If you could look at for I don't know how you would even, but it's just like I've seen these. If you're a knitter and you use chunky wool, you can get needles like this for knitting really heavy chunky wool that are like a needle with a lasso on the end for it. So it's that sort of idea, but just a sewing needle. And it's
Cool.
brilliant for, 4 threads through and send it all through together, which is what I would do.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I'm
That
not
that's that sounds
somebody should
brilliant.
make
Maybe
it here, but
yeah, if I find it, I'll put it on the email if you find the name of
yes,
it though.
I'll try and
But
find.
yeah, the
Do you
other option
sell?
for burying is spiral line needles, which are quite
Oh
good.
yeah,
The ones we get, yeah, there's a lady in the States who makes them and they're quite good. So
spiral eye needle.
yeah.
Okay. Someone else said something then. Sorry.
Yeah, I was asking Liz, do you sell?
Sorry.
Do you sell what? The German needles?
Oh, did I just mute Rachel? I didn't mean to do that. I could hear something in the background. I don't want to
Yes,
mute
you
Rachel.
you
Oh,
you
I'm so
muted me.
sorry.
Do you sell the Orifil 4030, Liz?
No, we don't actually.
But you will do, yes?
Well, yeah, I think after this talk, I really should. 'Cause- yeah, yeah,
They
leave
cotton
that one
patch
with me,
do,
Rachel.
don't they? Cotton patch do or a
Cotton
fill.
Patch do. Yeah, Cotton Patch do. Get it from Cotton Patch, Rachel.
Yeah.
There you go. Get it from my brothers instead.
Yeah, exactly. As good as getting it from you, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it's
Almost
fine.
second
It's fine.
best.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, listen, thank you so much, Joe. Inspired, absolutely. I think one of the things that always strikes me about your quilts is they make me feel happy. And I
Oh,
think it's just the combination of the designs, the color, and just really inspiring. So thank you very much for sharing your story, your quilting knowledge, and everything with us. It's really appreciated. So on behalf of everybody, thank you very much.
Thank
thank you,
you.
everyone.
Thanks very
Great.
much.
Yeah, well done.
Thanks so much. Okay,
Yeah.
lovely to see you all.
Yeah, thanks for everybody who signed up to this talk. I'll be sending you an email with the link as soon as I've got it posted online. It'll be on YouTube, just as an unlisted video, but you'll be able to watch it. So if you do want to have another look at this, and if I can share any of the other information, like the type of needles from Germany, if I can get batch from my stepson lives in Cologne, so maybe he can send some
Yes.
over. But
Perfect.
yeah, no, it's brilliant. Thank you so much. And yeah, happy quilting, everybody. If you've got any other ideas for any talks and things, or if you have any feedback about this, just send us an email.